Namassabhabhyam Sabhapatischa. I am extremely happy to be here on this very important seminar in the Bharatiya knowledge system. I have probably in the last 2-3 years, some 30-40 seminars I would have attended, spoken. But when I walked in today here, I felt this was a slightly different campus. I still don't know why I felt like that. Thank you for inviting me here, Professor Vats, and I must thank Professor Deshmukh also for this opportunity to be here with you. Before I share some thoughts with you, let me start with Rig Veda is our oldest known repository of knowledge. So let me just start with one quote from Rig Veda before we really move on, because I really like this, so I thought I will. So this is Rig Veda has very beautiful suktas, 10,778 mantras organized in 10 mandalas and so on. So from the 10th mandala, I just wanted to quote something to you. Nasadasino tada asit tadanim nasid vyoma paroyat kimavari vakuhakasya sharman kima ashit gahanam gabhiram na mrityura asid amritam na tarhi naratrya anha asit praketah Anidavatam swadaya tadekam tatsmatan yenna parakinchanasa. I just quoted 2 mantras from a sukta called Nasadiya Sukta. You may be wondering why I am actually reciting Nasadiya Sukta here. Because whenever I recited this and asked people, 95% of them think a Purohit has come to do some puja. Because the moment you do a Vedic chant, and then people think, oh, Purohit has come, some puja is going to happen. Little people know this sukta, which has 8 mantras, called Nasadiya Suktam. And you go and just Google, there are a lot of foreigners who are trying to read it. Because there is a very beautiful speculation of the origin of the universe in these 8 mantras. Because our rishis were very keenly interested in cosmogony, cosmology. In fact, in all our Puranas, in the Panchalakshana of Puranas, one Lakshana is to talk about cosmogony. So it's no wonder that there is this natural curiosity to know about the origin of, Sarga, some Visarga, and all those are part of Vamshottara, all those Panchalakshanas are there. So the reason I recited here before I wanted to start my talk is to tell you that today average well-educated Indians are completely unaware of what is contained in our Vedas. They think in a moment you recite it in a particular way and then so Purohit has come, some puja is going to happen. There are a lot of scientific ideas, there are a lot of interesting speculations. There are a lot of mind-expanding thoughts. That's what we need today. Professor Bhushanji talked about innovation and all that. Our rishis were very, very keen that only an expanding mind is a mind which can inquire very well. Without any assumptions, any constraints, we should be able to think. We were known to be like that. For whatever reasons, in the last 200, 300 years, we have been compartmentalized in a particular way and we have been asked to think in a particular way and so on. Anyway, that's okay. That in no way prevents us in rediscovering our own strengths and our own beliefs in what we need to do in our life and so on. Anyway, what I will do, is there a presentation? I shared a presentation. Can you just, yeah, thank you. So let me just take you through a little bit of Indian knowledge system. And there's an interesting background to this. I wrote a book on this. The former AICT chairman, who happens to be my good friend, once requested, why don't you write a book? Sometimes you foolishly agree something without knowing what you are doing. But then I had the guidance of, at least 2 of them are sitting here. Professor Shriram is here, Professor M.D. Srinivas is here. I could really benefit from their vast expertise. And finally, we end up writing a book. And I thought I will share some of those ideas from the book. Of course, a 400-page book, you can't really talk in about 30 minutes, 45 minutes. But nevertheless, I wanted to give a little sense of what we can look for. There was one strong thought in me even before we started writing the book, and that was what Patordanji was also saying, that there is no point in merely glorifying the past. A lot of people end up doing that. They are also not doing for any wrong reason. I mean, it's just that when you see it so good, you start saying everything is there, everything is good, and so on. There are two thoughts, and this book is governed by those two thoughts. First one is, we don't have to glorify the past. What we can do is we can present some of the things that we found in the past in an objective way so that it's for people to understand what to do with that. That's one. Second thing, we should be able to bring to the table today the Indian knowledge system in a way that it is a lot more convincing for people. Because these 200, 300 years of brainwashing has put us in a very different kind of a platform. We need a particular way to actually reintroduce Indian knowledge system. So there are three things which is behind whatever I'm going to share with you. First thing is, it either points to living structures today. So we are not speculating on something. We are talking about living structures. And what more you need? You have living structures. So the first piece of evidence with which you have to argue is living structures. The second is archaeological evidences. So what is very special about archaeological evidence is you cannot dig up the earth 300 meters and insert something there. So it is very credible by its very structure of how we unearth the evidence and so on. And third is, of course, literary evidence. So these ideas that I am going to share with you today stands on these three pillars. Living structures, archaeological evidences, and literary evidences with which can we bring out what Indian knowledge system is. That is a humble attempt that has been made. So I just want to share a few thoughts with you on that. So let me start with this. I do not know how many of you can recognize this. This is the oldest living fort in the world. It's a living fort. Most of the forts are abandoned. This is a living fort. In another 22 years, it will complete 1,000 years. In 1156, Raja Jaisal built this fort. So a fort which can stay for 1,000 years must speak volumes about architectural capability of people at least 1,000 years back, if not more. This was built in 1156 CE. It's a Jaisalmer, right? And I do not know whether we can think of forts which live for 1,000 plus years. It's a living fort. People are living there and so on. Just to tell you that architecture, there are a whole lot of texts one can go on discussing about and so on. But to tell you that we know the elements of how to even do architectural structures in this country. You talk about, many of you would have been, very familiar with PS1 and PS2 and so on. The big temple, the Bharatiya temple, we celebrated 1,000 years, 10 years back. So to put structures which can stay for 1,000 years seems to be a simple act of some thoughtfulness which our ancestors have had. Today we don't teach any of that in our architectural colleges. I have been pleading them to teach Samarangana Sutradhara or Mayamatam, take some nice architectural textbooks, Vastu books. And recently I had an opportunity, the last 2 years I am doing, we bring about 70 to 100 architects, civil engineers and architects who are all family-owned businesses. Some of them are large houses also, to IIM Bangalore. And I spent 3 hours on Vastu Shastra. Invariably, I have a very strange experience. I asked them, can you tell me Vastu Shastra? Because these are all people who are practicing. So one gentleman told me, if you put this window on the northeast corner, the mother-in-law will die. That is what Vastu Shastra. So I got half a dozen such understanding of what Vastu Shastra is. Then I told them that your understanding of Vastu Shastra is so contrived and misleading, whereas Vastu Shastra has 6 beautiful structures in it. It talks about site selection, it talks about how do you put palaces and living places, public buildings. How do you make beautiful couches? Iconography is part of Vastu Shastra. How do you select an Shilpi? How do you have, who are all the skilled workforce? How do you select them? What are the qualifications of a chief architect? All those are very nicely written there, and we have brought it to such a level that you need to only look at a certain element of what is called Vastu Purusha Mandala and then make it to be a pseudo-science. This is where we are going through. Because little we know that we are capable, such structures should remind us that we are capable of putting very good architectural marvels in this country. I don't know how many of you can recognize this. This is about 350 years, 400 years old palace in Madurai, city of Madurai. This is called Tirumalai Nayakar Mahal. The district court was Madurai, was operating from here. Today you go there, the place looks very abandoned. This is the respect we give for such structures, and large structure without pillars in between. There are civil engineers who will understand how difficult it is to make a large structure without supporting pillars not closer by. And if you need a large hall, there's no point in having pillars. The visibility is gone. Whereas our Vastu texts have actually discussed about these designs. How do you design a sabha? For example, you will find in Samarangana Sutradhara, there are 8 different types of designs have been proposed for sabha constructions. So one can keep on going in every channel of knowledge that one can think of. One can see, something can stay for 400 years and it looks, they have just recently painted it, that's where I found this photograph. So it looks slightly better than what it was 20 years back. But the fact that you know how to put large sabhas, like our Rashtrapati Bhavan, we will have the main assembly hall and so on. Our architectural giants knew how to put up such structures. That's another indication that we ought to be very good in architecture, right? There are actually discussions of 56 roomed houses, 12-story buildings. And what is so special about Vastu Shastra is there is a lot of details. Beyond a point, I am unable to get into the detail because you need to know some technicalities of that. So many measurements of proportions, all those are available. It's not a very superficial kind of a discussion of what it is and so on. Again, I do not know how many of you can recognize this. There are only 5 dams in the world which were 2000 years and beyond. And there is only one dam which is surviving. This is the dam. This is in India. This is the only dam of the 5 of that vintage which is still in use. This is in a place called Tiruchirappalli. This is called the Grand Anaikat. Kallanai, they call it as Kallanai. This was put by Karikal Chola in 2nd century CE probably, within 1800 years or 1900 years or whatever. So this is built 1800 years back. All other dams of this vintage are no longer existing. This is the only one which is surviving. Again, to tell you that it talks about during Sangam period in Tamil Nadu, for example, Professor Srinivas has also written something about it. I have looked at some of his works. How we have been very good in what, if I have to use today's terms, we were good in watershed management. And there are Uttaramerur inscriptions which talk about how do you manage, how do you have a system by which you can make sure that these natural resources are put to gainful use. Very detailed things are available to us, right? So the Grand Anaikat, world's oldest still in use dam, being the 4th oldest dam in that group, okay? In 1804, the British raised the height of the dam by 27 inches. I was giving this talk somewhere, and one of my colleague from IIT Madras called me and said last year or a year and a half, there was a PhD thesis submitted in IIT Delhi, which studied this dam. And he was telling me the conclusion, one of the conclusions they made through the PhD work was it was wrong to raise the height of the dam by 27 inches. It was not correct. And the PhD thesis actually argued that the reason why that dam height was kept to that level is over a period of every 6 or 7 years there is a hydrological cycle, and there must be an overflow of water and then do something for the downstream landscape to make it sustainable. looks like. That's the PhD thesis of one in IIT Delhi last year. He was telling me, I even contacted that professor and so on. Whereas the Britishers just put 27 inches more. Today all that we do is we just paint it once in a few years and then we use a dam which is more than 2000 years, around 2000 years old. Again, it speaks of volumes of science and technology. If you at all you ask Indians of science and technology, of course you look at the living structures. The proof of the pudding is in eating. We don't have to go around and then look for, right? This is a temple in southern Tamil Nadu. This is the largest temple in Tirunelveli district. It is called the Nellayappar temple. Okay, I was born very close to this. I have gone there as a child. I have gone many times. What is so special about this is there are a cluster of pillars that you see here. All these pillars are actually musical pillars, which means essentially if you have a stick, you can probably do a 3-year concert sitting there. You can keep the 7 notes are there. You can, if you know how to beat which note when, probably you can do a concert. The Pandya kings were known for building some musical pillars. Madurai temple, Meenakshi temple has musical pillars. Of course, nowadays they have covered all of them with proper aluminium shutters because the number of people, tourist inflow in Madurai is so high that the pillar will break. Everybody start. As a child, I have gone and then tapped it many times. But then today it's not possible. You can only see. People will say, oh, this is a musical pillar. Whereas you can go to Tirunelveli, Nellayappar temple, you can see it today. And this was built 1400 years back by a Pandya king called Nindrasir Nedumaran, who built this temple. Okay, and a cluster of 48 pillars were carved from it. All these are monolithic stones which are carved. It is not that you make 48 pillars and take a Fevikwik or something and then stick it. Our technology is far more deeper and far more involved. Okay, it is a single stone which is, I don't even know how you can put your hand in between these two small little looking pillars. There are 160 plus pillars in the temple, each one of them having a cluster of 48 pillars. Now, this speaks volumes of our science and technology if you wish. For example, first of all, you should have a knowledge of sound engineering, frequency, amplitude, all those notes, how do you get it, that's required. Working on, granite. Granite is the hardest known material. It's not easy. It's very difficult to work on material. It is very hard, but if you put too much thing, it will break also. So to carve it like this, which means we need high-speed alloy steels to work on. Working on granite and getting such beautiful shapes is not easy. I mean, we can just think about it. So it talks about we ought to have been good in metallurgy, we ought to be good in aesthetics, we ought to be good in sound engineering. I mean, you can go on. You ought to be good in architecture in any case. So I keep telling people, don't visit temples. In South India, what happens is people visit temple, they give kumkum, you just put it on the wall and destroy the wall. Rather spend 1 hour, half an hour, look at the deity, spend 2 hours, look at the structures. The best of science and technology and aesthetics and fashion, if you want, you can see it in temples. Indians don't even know that. They don't do it that way. Because we just don't look at that angle at all. Every temple is worthy of the Kailasanatha temple. I read the UNESCO heritage report. I read a report on when it was declared as UNESCO heritage. They were stunned. They said, how can you excavate a rock from the top to bottom? Do you have workers with a rope tied on their waist and they were dropped 1 inch at a time when they were working on the temple? Nobody knows. Indians are known for enormous amount of passion. Where is it today? Why can't we lead the world again? If you look at all these evidences, there is no iota of doubt that we were extremely passionate about things. We created things which lived for years. Everything that we created was immortal. There is no notion of mortality, not only in our spiritual science. Our living was like that. So look at these temples, for example. So when you tap one pillar, of course the surrounding pillars vibrate because sound waves travel through those channels, So it just starts vibrating. It's all amazing to see this. And these are all living structures. I'm not showing you a photo of something which happened some time back. You go and see today. You can see this. Of course, I don't want to talk much on mathematics, astronomy. 2 stalwarts are sitting here. I will not, do anything of that. But little bit I want to talk about. In fact, I keep asking this question to my students. I ask my students, if you have to use a Roman system of numbering, and please write the velocity of light. which is 3 into 10 power 8 meters per second, and m is the largest number that we have been told in, then of course there is something called myriad and so on. If you use m and 3 into 10 power 5 times, you have to write m to get that number. That's not simply going to work, right? So we had a very robust system. In fact, I was just reading in Georges Ifra's book, the origin of history of mathematics and so on, volume 2, which is about the Indian mathematical tradition and the number system and so on. There is an episode where he talks about Swayamvara for Gautama Buddha, because he was prince of Kapilavastu before he became Buddha. The Swayamvara was a quiz on mathematics, and the sage Arjuna asked him to tell the number which is Tallakshana, 10 power 49. Then in his ability to tell all those numbers in powers of 10 up to 10 power 49, he gave another complex formula. 10 power 23 times 2 times star, etc. At the 9th counting, it will give a number 10 power 421. So I was wondering, why do you need such a large number like 10 power 421 in the first place? I mean, that talks about only when you need something, you need to look for numbers. So I was jokingly saying the only number that was big enough that you need is what is called, I call it as A Raja index of corruption, 1.76 into 10 power 13. Because it is difficult to say 1,76,000 crores and all is very difficult. 1.76 into 10 power 13 is a little easier to, or Avogadro's number for that matter. So large numbers indicate a certain sense of largeness with which we looked at things. Today in management education we say, big is, don't think small, big is beautiful. And that has been our culture. We have been thinking, in fact I was able to collect a set of references in which large numbers are actually being quoted. I have just put a table here. As just now told you about Georges Ifra when he in that Gautama Buddha's Swayamvara and so on. Now, if you look at the Yuddha Kanda of Ramayanam, there is an enumeration of the army in which you will see a number up to 10 power 61. Mahoga, up to that numbers are all laid out. So, large numbers seems to be a way in which we are able to handle things, which means we needed such big numbers. And such large numbers indicate to the possibility of using those numbers. It is not just for the sake of it. We want to use it for some gainful purpose. So this country, that's why, in Chandogya Upanishad, the sage says, Nalpe sukhamasti bhuma vai sukham. He says, Yad alpam tat martyam. If you go after small little things, they are all mortal. You should go after big things. I think this culture, this society believed in it. This society was inspired about thinking big things, going after it, achieving it. Without that, you can't get these kinds of things. They don't come by Maya Jal. Nothing happens by Maya Jal. I think it's a hard effort, a lot of thinking, a lot of passion. All those are characterized by this civilization of which we are all part of. Now, I brought this iron pillar just because it is quite commonly known. So, this iron pillar, as we all know, is about 1,700 years old. Initially, it was in Udayagiri, somewhere near Orissa. Then, in the 10th century, I think it was brought and put to where it is now in Qutub Minar. Now, if you look at this iron pillar, as we all know, it doesn't rust, right? We have not put it in a bank strong room, or we have not kept it in a vacuum. It's lying on the it's exposed to the vagaries of sun and moon and rain and whatnot. Still, it is refusing to, corrosion resistance. And it's not just this. There are several of them. In fact, there was one IISc professor, I was just reading a paper. He had studied, the iron pillar in near Sringeri. You have this Kollur temple. Kollur temple, there is an iron pillar. He has found that is also not corroding. And at least you can say, sir, this is at the middle of the country. The oceans are far away. But then Kollur is just 40 kilometers from Arabian Sea. Or if you go to Puri, you have Bhubaneswar and Puri, there are several iron beams. So again, this points to something very interesting. If you are able to get pillar which doesn't rust, that speaks volumes about what is called ferrous-carbon alloy. Steel is nothing but an alloy of iron, ferrous and carbon. So Indians are very good in ferrous-carbon alloy. In fact, every metallurgist, every mechanical engineer has to read what is called temperature time transformation diagram. There is something called TTT diagram. Without that, you never become a metallurgist. At different times, at different temperature, what happens to the ferrous carbon? Its composition. That is the basis for material science and for all interesting metals that we bring today. And we have a 2000-year legacy more than that, in which we know how to make very good ferrous carbon alloys. Is it not science and engineering? Of course it is science and engineering. We were very good in metallurgy. We were very good in metalworking. So you have many of them. Just, at Dhar you have in Madhya Pradesh, which is twice as big as this. You have in Konark Temple. You have one in Mount Abu and so on. So which is in a way indicating that this know-how was widely prevalent. That's why I'm giving examples from throughout the country, not just in one part of the country. It's so widely prevalent, which means that's something which we knew. In fact, some of the Jati names, if you say Asuras in Jharkhand area, they are all, people who work on smelting iron. So we had Loharins. Loha is, so different Jati. So there was a specialized trade in which we are very good. If you go to the, Auroville, Rajasthan area, Hindustan Zinc and, University of Baroda did extensive studies to understand how we went about. Zinc was India's contribution to the world. Because if you take the ore and try to separate zinc, between 500 degree and 550 degree, the metal separates, but at 550 degree, it becomes zinc oxide. So you have to actually capture it between 500 and 550 degrees centigrade, which the Indians did what is called downward drift distillation process. They were able to extract zinc, which the rest of the world took much later to understand. And I have been reading somewhere that by 11th century, the export of zinc from India was, production of zinc was of the industrial grade in that Rajasthan area, running to million tons and so on. And if you look at Buddhist vihars, they are all, the brass and bronze. You find alloys of copper and zinc used in huge quantities, huge, statues of Buddha made of the alloys of zinc and so on. So all these point to again that it's not just ferrous carbon alloy, it is not iron, it is not steel, it is zinc, it is gold, it is copper. This country is full of evidences. We don't have to, artificially imagine. You have to just understand that all these have happened in a particular way. So I showed this to one metallurgist. This is a 3rd century seal. Now these PS2 also they are showing seal all the time, in this movie. So this 3rd century seal, I showed it to one metallurgist. I said, can you please tell me what does it involve? It looks nice. He told me a long list which covered the entire end to end. He said, sir, first you should know that gold is available somewhere below the earth. It's step 1. You should know how to extract the ore. Step 2. Step 3, maybe 1 kilogram of ore, you may get 10 grams of gold. So you should know how to first separate and then take out the metal from that. Step 3. Then you should know gold cannot be used by itself. You have to mix it with a little bit of copper to make it ductile and malleable and so on. Then he said you should know what is called molding, you should know what is called embossing, you should know what is called forming. Literally all that I read in metallurgy he told me before making this. Whereas our Gupta kings, our kings have been traditionally using seals. This is just one sample. Just to tell you, again this shows that we were widely, deeply established in the field of metal and metalworking. We don't have to scratch our head and ask, did they ever? We need to study these evidences a little more carefully and understand how it ought to have come and so on. There's another nice ornament, which is 1st century BCE. It is in the Metropolitan Museum Art, I think in Washington or somewhere. Again, to make an ornament of this kind, it's not just metalworking. You need very intricate tools to make these kinds of ornaments. So all these, so the second area I want to talk to you about is the area of metalworking. Metal and metalworking, and so much so, we have this concept of what is called, look at this. This is a very famous steel called wood steel, which was exported in large quantities from South India. In South India at that time, there were two very interesting exit points. One is called a Kodungalur port, which is about 50-60 kilometers north of Ernakulam on the western coast. Of course, you had the Pumbuhar on the eastern coast, and of course, Tutukurin. There are a lot of references, literary references of how we have gone far off from there to Far East, up to Rome, and so on. So this wood steel was manufactured in a tri-junction of Tamil Nadu, Kerala, and Karnataka. See, Salem region, if you see, if you go 50 kilometers, you'll go to Kerala, 100 kilometers maybe. You come another 100 kilometers this side, it will be Karnataka. That's all iron ore region. So the steel is called, in Tamil, it is called Urukku. In Kannada, it is called Ukku. So Ukku and Urukku are difficult to pronounce. Somebody said that's how it became woods. It is a little easy to pronounce. So the wood steel was largely exported from that part of India to Damascus to make what is called Damascus blades. Warfare till 15th century was only talwars, no? We didn't have gunpowder and all that came much later. So all the warfare were manufactured using wood steel. The ingots were exported from India. Till 17th century, 16th century, this was the situation. Produced as early as 700 BCE in several places in India. In fact, there are references of Arabs talking about how they felt the Indian steel was very good, as in 12th century CE and so on. But then what happened? The Britishers introduced production taxes. They introduced mining bans. Obviously, then the trade will have to come to a grinding halt. So after 17th century, we lost out on shipbuilding. We lost out on, metal working and so on, because the British Raj simply killed this flourishing know-how and knowledge that we have had. But if you go up to 17th century and then walk back into the history, you will find a whole lot of references. In Yukti Kalpataru, which is a 11th century work, you will find dimensions of different types of ships. In Arthashastra, in book 2, you will find the different types of ships, seafaring ships, river-faring ships, small boats. All those mentions are available in Arthashastra. So this continuous stream of literature again and again points to us that if you are good in metalworking, you may be good in, initially we made wooden boats and so on, but I am sure at some stage we would have shifted. There are references about Indian shipbuilding also, but we lost all of them after the 17th century. Today I don't think we are anywhere in the scheme of things when it comes to shipbuilding. Maybe after a while we may possibly regain and so on. And our Prime Minister goes these days to different countries and only two things happen. Either he brings back the stolen, right? Or he gives one of these kind of beautiful looking idols. And these idols, typically Chola idols, 6th century, 7th century up to 11th century, you will find these idols, And Indians were so good that they were able to make Panchaloha idols also. I don't even know what will happen if you put some sambar powder, water and tamarind, sambar never comes. But you put 5 different metals and make beautiful idols out of it, Panchaloha idols. And such beautiful looking idols were made by a certain mechanism, which is called, what we call it as, lost wax. Now they call it as lost wax. We call it as Madhuchishta Vidhanam, Madhu Uchishta Vidhanam. Uchishta is leftover, Madhu is honey. So it is, the honey wax is used to create the shell so that it is very sharp, and then when you pour the metal, the shell disappears and all that kind of things, which the French started developing that idea from 17th century. Whereas in Vishnu Dharmottara Purana, you find references of this Madhuchishta Vidhanam and so on. And we knew how to even use 5 metals, mix it in a certain proportion and make beautiful looking, artifacts. These are all part of Vastu. Iconography is also part of Vastu Shastra. You find chapters of how do you create such artistic pieces and so on. So all these repeatedly show to us that we as a country have been very good in metallurgy. We have been very good in metalworking, architecture. We have been very good in mathematics, astronomy. I'm not touching it. There are other people who can do a great job of it. I don't have to really do that. All these are repeatedly showing that here is a culture which had a whole set of developed knowledge over years, which speaks about the Indian knowledge system that we have. I thought I'll just first show you all these different things. So I want to tell you, so what is it that we are looking at? I want you to first understand there is a difference between a country and a civilization. Because unless we make, I'm happy we call it as BKS. When I wrote the book, I called it as IKS because that's what the ministry asked me to do. I wrote it as Indian knowledge system. Today we call it as Bharatiya knowledge, Jnana Parampara, or, Jnana Pranali or whatever. So there is a difference between a country and a civilization. We need to get these differences very clearly. Because otherwise, a country is simply an area of land, okay, with its own people, government, etc., etc. It's a political state. So India is a fancy idea which came on 15th August 1947. It's just a map of a certain political boundary for whatever reasons. So that is called a country, okay. It's nothing but a certain expanse of land, which is a political unit. That is what is called a country. Whereas what we are talking when we say Bharatiya Jnana Parampara, we are talking about what is called civilization. Civilization means the people, the culture, the knowledge system, the thought processes has evolved over time, and it specifically points to something. See, I was in Iran in 2006 for about 3 months. I was in Iran. And I went there for 3 reasons. First, there is a good friend of mine, he kept on calling me, you should come and teach a PhD level course on simulation. So, in pressurizing me, I went. Second reason I went, I had a textbook which was yet to be completed. Best way I thought to complete it is stay away from family for a few months. So I just went there. In quick proportion, I finished it. Third thing, they gave me a little good money. I was trying to buy a house. I thought it will be useful. Let me just take this money and put it onto a house. And so I was able to hit 3 stones, mangoes with 1 stone. But what I found was astonishing in Iran. In Iran, in every house, before you enter into the house, there is a tap outside the house. You have to wash your hands and legs before you go in. Even if you are inside the house, if you go into the kitchen, there is a tap outside the kitchen. You have to still wash your hands and legs and then go into the kitchen only after washing your hands. I mean, look at this sampradaya. Look at these cultural practices. That is because they share our civilization. Politically, things would have spun differently in different years. So the Bharatiya Jnana Parampara is about the Akhanda Bharat, not about India. So I don't want you to think India is just a formation for some reason we have done it. So we must understand we are talking about a civilizational corpus here, not a knowledge of a particular country called India. We are an unbroken civilization known to mankind for at least 5 millennia, if not more. Certainly it is more than that, but with our whatever evidence we are trying to go up to 5 millennia. Yeah? So a country is just a political formation. It's just like the surface of an ocean. Country is just like you are seeing the top side of the ocean. Whereas on the other hand, if you talk of civilization, we are talking about the substratum. Today the Indians are floating on the top layer. We need to deepen a little bit. Somewhere we are floating on the top. I think our Jnana Parampara is such that we need to go a little deeper, then we understand the cultural paradigm. Every Indian, in my opinion, must read at least 1 Purana, if not more. Puranas are encyclopedic. Everything about culture, everything about life practices, a little bit of science, how do you do this, how do you think about it? If you want a little astronomy, you want a little about Godhead, everything is available in Puranas. That was a torchbearer of every practices and thought processes. Why have we abandoned it? We don't teach Puranas anywhere. Even in Sanskrit universities, I don't find them seriously teaching Puranas. I think every Indian must read at least 1 Purana. With all seriousness, then we get a sense of what kind of a civilizational corpus that this country has developed, and maybe we can get something out of it. So the lens that we need to really use is a lens of a civilizational corpus, not a country-based knowledge system. We should take that out of our mind. Here is a civilization which has contributed, which is contributing, which will contribute. So getting to know of the past, drawing it from there, and trying to make it sense of it today is the most important thing that every Indian must do, because we have the luxury of a civilizational corpus with us. Yeah. So just to give you a little sense of it, the Indian knowledge system, for the sake of my book, I broadly divided that into 2 categories, literary and non-literary. What I mean by non-literary is there is a whole lot of knowledge for which you don't need a lipi. Your grandmother tells you what you should do when you get fever. There are so many oral practices which are very rich. It is not written down in the form of a book and then somebody with a lipi, nothing. We have a lot of oral knowledge, right? Then we have the literary piece. Some of the literary knowledge are also oral. The entire Vedic knowledge is transmitted orally, but it is still having a literary base. It has a lipi, there is a certain structure in which the Vedas have been laid out and so on. Whereas the other one I am talking about is oral traditions. So you can put it into two broad blocks. On the literary, you have Sanatana Dharma, you have other dharmic traditions, then of course you have the regional corpus. This is how our Indian knowledge system is. And if you get into the Sanatana Dharma, you have of course the core Sanatana Dharma principle, which is the Chaturdasha Vidyasthana or Ashtadasha Vidyasthana. You have the Chatur Vedas, Vedangas, Darshanas, right? 6 Darshanas are there, Itihasa, Dharma Shastra, all those form that core principle of Sanatana Dharma. Then of course, very little people know, a lot of Indians today think the Indian knowledge system means only some things which are used by Purohit for some mantra or for some gods of religion and so on. You have a whole lot of things. Otherwise, how do you put dams which exist for 2000 years? How do you put a structure which lives for 1000+ years? That doesn't come without a certain science. So the Indian knowledge system has plenty on basic and applied science, engineering, technology, architecture, alchemy, aesthetics, arts, kavya, you name it. A whole lot of things which is part of the Sanatana Dharma, because they all owe allegiance to Sanatana Dharma. Right? So that is how this whole corpus is, public administration if you wish and so on. Then of course you have the other dharmic traditions, most importantly Bauddha and Jaina traditions. You think of 2000 years and more and so on. Of course we are recently Sikh and other traditions are also there. So the other dharmic traditions also bring a certain corpus of knowledge. For example, Jains have been good in some mathematical contributions that they have made. Right? So we have those kinds of other traditions which have also brought a lot of things. Then you have a vast regional corpus which has retold all these in regional languages. This entire corpus that you have on the left side can be multiplied by 100. Retold, contextualized, do it to in a vernacular, add the local stories to emphasize what it is and so on. So we are talking about a huge corpus which is also belongs to the regional corpus. You have Ramayana in so many languages. So it has not deviated from Ramayana, but it has brought it in a particular way. Every conceivable material in Sanatana Dharma, core and other sciences are also available in regional corpus. So imagine what is the corpus on which we are sitting. Such a huge corpus. Then of course you have the oral traditions in which you have art forms, health. This is the only country, I will tell you, although we are trying to challenge it, this is the only country you take a vehicle and go on the road. Right? Every 50 kilometers or 100 kilometers, the taste on your tongue will change because the food is a little different. Same dosa in South Tamil Nadu will be different from the dosa in New Delhi station or somewhere else and so on. This country is full of richness. Whether it is food or health or life practices or folklore, all these are oral traditions. So this forms Indian knowledge system if you wish. Right? And talking about the historicity, well, if you take, I have taken certain classification schemes which the Westerners use. For example, 300 CE to 1500 CE or 500 CE to 1500 CE is called Dark Ages. According to the, now they are trying to remove that term from the web and they are trying to do so many things. They are very uncomfortable with that. In those 1000 years, in India was very bright. There was nothing dark about it. A whole lot of work on mathematics, on astronomy, on Ayurveda and health, so many. Anyway, this is 3000 BC to 500 CE. I am not giving you an exhaustive list. I am only just telling you a small sample to tell that even 5000 years back, we have been thinking about a lot of these issues. We have written about it. Arthashastra, the level of detail you see in Arthashastra is astonishing. It says on Ashada Paurnami of every year, you have to come and present your books of accounts for auditing. To that level of detail. And how should you present the books of accounts? How will you come? Who are all the people you will meet? If you don't come by this time, what kind of a penalty you will get? The level of detail you see in Arthashastra is very good. Weights and measurements, book 2 has. There is a directorate of weights and measurements. It talks about 12 different scales of weighing. And then it says what frequency you should calibrate. If you don't calibrate, what is the penalty that you will have? level of detail, and it's written 2,200 years back. And the climax of this entire Arthashastra, in the first mantra, he says, I have not written anything. I have only gathered what others have said. Arthashastra is written only like that. He says, I agree with Bharadwaja, I don't agree with him. This is how the book is written. He says, I have collected the thought, I also put my views on it. Sometime I agree with two of them. How many Amatyas you should have, how many council of ministers you should have. He says, I don't agree with any of them. He says, you should not have too many, you should not have too little also. That level of detail. We have thought about all that some 2,500 years back, right? And if you take the so-called dark ages, which the Western world is talking about, we have done a whole lot of things. Series about the Kerala School of Math, Professor Ramasubramaniam is here, Srinivas and Professor Sriram are here. The Kerala School of Math from 1400 to 1750, the whole series of developing, improving the earlier one, writing a refined commentary on it, finding better approximation. This is what we were doing during dark ages, so-called dark ages. All these came almost to a kind of a abrupt stop by the beginning of the 19th century. 1800, it all came to a sort of a grinding halt. And we are still suffering that, okay? So the question is, what do we do with that now? How do we unlock this treasure? Is it just, we should just keep talking about it and say, oh, we had this, we had that, this is good, that is good. Is that what we should do, or is there something more than that we should do? I just want to leave a few thoughts and then leave it at that. First thing is, there is compelling evidence. In fact, there is no iota of doubt that our ancestors had and know of many things that have been improved, developed, applied over and over, again and again. We have compelling evidence. We also know that we have no inkling of those today, thanks to our educational system. This is not part of anything. You have to go, you have to make such seminars outside of the curriculum to get something out of it, right? We have very little awareness of these details. We do not see teaching of these in any of the institutions. So we are in that situation now. There's such a discontinuity that we have created in the last 200 plus years that we need to now start all over and ask, what do we do now? I don't think it's a good idea to just leave it like this and go. Somebody talked about Patodhanji talked about tradition. I'll tell you, traditions are like pickles. Or traditions are like Scotland wine, if you wish. 400 years is better, 600 years is even better. We need traditions because in our management theory, there is something called path dependence. In strategy, Gary Hamel and Prahlad, we have a series of theory called core competence and so on. That central argument in that is the path that you walk is a function of the path that you already walked. That's called path dependence theory. How can you just disown the whole thing and say, let's start all over, and that kind of discontinuity will not do good to any society. I'm not talking about just the Indian society. No society will be better off if you create a discontinuity. So we have to now create this continuity again. We have to reinvest on this continuity. That's a question that we need to ask now. Now, some of the science and technology practices are in use, but the Britishers have called all of them as, look at the word Adivashi. Adivashi is a very profound word. Somebody who has lived for thousands of years. So they are the most important people, but we have just put them for the purpose of quota somewhere. We have put some 7%, 5%, and that's how we are dealing this whole thing now. We have called them as tribal, rural, and we have just marginalized them. I think we have to really discover Indian knowledge system and then take the leaf out of it. We need to go there and do some research there. We need to go and dig up and see what there are still practices here and there. We need to explore, do an understudy with them, understand what is happening, how do we bring it out, what do we learn out of it, etc. This is a very important thing that we need to do today. And why did we lose all of them? It's very simple. It's largely oral tradition, and you don't have to go even 200 years back. Today, what is happening in India? Every young student, every student in this country wants to become a software engineer. It doesn't matter what you are. This whole notion of Prakriti has been destroyed now. Prakriti Gunasambhavaha is not to be used today. Everybody have to sit in front of a computer and do ASDF, GF, semicolon, LK, JHJ. If you can do it better, you are better off. Why? Because we thought that's where money is. So either you would become a software engineer. If you miss the bus, you have to do an MBA and become a manager. This is how this country is going. Now in 30 years, if you see this, Imagine what would have happened in 200 years back if the government came and told, the British Raj, which was at that time, came and told, if you practice all these, you have no living. If you do the kind of things that I am saying, you will get your livelihood. I will give you salary only when you do these kinds of jobs. Now, please understand, all these are only to the extent of when I am able to raise my family. If I have to find difficult to have 3 meals a day, I have to address that first. That was the route by which this was done. So first there was this umbilical cord was cut. Moment you cut the umbilical cord, since it is an oral tradition, nothing was substantially written down. In about 50, 70, 100 years, we almost lost it. Because it was all written. It was all oral. So therefore, this is where we had that additional complication that we believed strongly in an oral tradition. Therefore, we didn't document it. One of the things I found in science and engineering when I was reading for the sake of writing that book, there was one problem I found. If you ask, for example, there are different types of steel. Different types of steel is mentioned in Rasaratna Samuchaya, 11th century text. But then if you ask what is the process of making, if you ask the nitty-gritty details of the process behind making shipbuilding, Yukti Kalpataru talks about different types of ships, but it doesn't tell you the mechanics of shipbuilding process. The know-how was completely, know-how in my opinion is completely non-existent today. That's why we have to go back to the rural people. We have to find from them what they are doing because they're all oral tradition. This is a big task for us. If we are able to do it, we will be able to take the next leaf out of it. Otherwise, all these are simply, we have lost most of it. So people ask me, why bother about Indian knowledge system? It's not just about pride and all that things. That's one story. But I'll give you 2 examples to understand why it may be. I keep telling this to my students at IIM Bangalore. I tell them the next 100 years is knowledge society. It's not what is the size of your military, how big, tanks and fighters that you have. They are all fine. I think now it's all about World Intellectual Property Organization, USPTO, etc. That's what it is. So when it comes to patent, I will make it too simple rather than getting into the what is patent? You came and said, I know this process today. I came and told, I know this process yesterday, you had to give the patent to me. In simple terms, this is what patent is. You said, I know it today. I told, I know it yesterday. Therefore, if you can verify it, you should give the patent to me. In simple terms. Now, in this country, we can't say it because we don't know what our ancestors said. So look at this example. A US company was awarded a patent for neem as a pesticide, and we failed in our efforts to revoke the patent because we have to scratch to find out. Although in our day-to-day life, we use neem as a pesticide and insecticide and so on. It's an oral tradition for many of us. And maybe it is written somewhere, but who is reading it? Who knows about it? We lost this. Now, there is a counter-example. These are all popular examples. When Dr. Mashelkar was the chairman of the CSIR, we fought actually to revoke a patent on using powdered turmeric for wound healing. 2 Indians in University of Mississippi got this patent. And we had to put some 100 scientists for 5-7 years to dig our material, and finally we could get it revoked. This is a very inefficient way of fighting the patent war. We can't fight a patent war like this. If we have to say that we will be a global leader, if we have to say that we have the know-how, we should know that first. And we have to know that first, we have to read Indian knowledge system. So even if not for anything, in fact, I keep telling people, you are a metallurgist, read some text related to it. You are a person of chemistry, read something on chemistry. You are a person of biology, please read something on biology. That's the greatest contribution we can make as Indians today. Otherwise, we will hopelessly lose the patent war. Because it is going to be very inefficient to scratch and search and find out what our ancestors have said. In a way, it is acceptable to today's scheme of, for them, Shraddha is not a pramana. It's only, Pratyaksha Anumana, Upamana. Shabda is not a pramana in today's schemes in the modern, so we have to play to that tune. Which means we have to read all our Indian knowledge system, at least for that reason. It will inspire us, it will make us take a leaf out of it, and it will help us innovate things in a particular. I keep telling some of the textile manufacturers, do you know that, I think it is in Brihas Samhita, I think, there are 5 humanoids for male, 5 humanoids for female described there, which means the ratio of head to upper limbs to lower limbs. the ratio of head to neck to body. I say, as a ready-made manufacturer, you should have read it. Our iconography uses only that. That is why it is all mentioned. That's why our idols look so beautiful, na? So there are 5 humanoids for male, 5 humanoids for female available in Brihad Samhita. Who is reading it? Why can't people who are in the business of ready-made textile manufacturing, because it looks like the whole world can be covered under any of these 5 proportions? We don't, it's proportions. In fact, I met a Stapati in Kumbakonam a few years back. He was putting a temple. He had one long blade of coconut. Coconut leaf is a long blade, no? He had a long blade of coconut leaf which he had folded and kept it like this. He said, sir, this is 128. I have folded it into a form that it is actually, if you open it, it is 128. You know, fold, 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 fold and fold. He said, I asked, why do you have it? He says, all my proportions of, the height of the Mukhya Dwara to the height of the ceiling, everything I measure it with this. I just count it and I use it like a scale. What kind of skills that we are losing? I have no idea. So that is what we can do. So what all things we can do? I strongly urge, first let us get to know IKS. Without knowing what it is, what are we going to do with that? A lot of people tell me, sir, past is past, let us go forward. First you know what is past, then only you know what to do. Even any research. If you are a researcher in chemistry, you have to read all the past works and get to know it. Only then you will innovate your delta on that. Here, without reading, what are you going to do with IKS? So I think the first step is to get to know IKS. Then we can, as we read, then we can, this is one area where we can do some application. This is one area where we can find something different. This is one area where we can make a delta out of it. That is the second step we can do. Then one can get to deep specialized studies in areas leading to research. That is step 3. And visualize the new world order from the IKS standpoint. So this is a 4-step journey. I think today UGC and all these government regulatory bodies are really working on step 1. This is very important. Unless you know it, what are you going to do? Without knowing what it is, there is no imagination that we will have. So that's what we must be doing. I am sure we must understand that IKS is a toolbox. See, you can have a toolbox. All that you can say is, screwdriver can be used for a certain purpose. Spanner can be used for a certain purpose. That's all we can say. Now, if there is a problem, you have to decide, should I use a combination of a screwdriver and a spanner? Should I hold it with a cutting plier and so on? IKS is a good toolbox. First, we should know the toolbox. Then we know in what ways we can really put it to use and which way we can go forward. I think those are things that we need to really do. So I think that's what the current governmental efforts are, and we are very happy to be part of it in our small ways. I think institutions are joining hands. We all must, go towards this direction and so on. I'll conclude this talk with this visual, because that in a way summarizes where we are and where we need to go. There was a temple. And as you know, in many of the temples, there are some beggars sitting and asking for alms, and we, sort of give them some 1 rupee, 2 rupee, whatever. One day, one sannyasi was about to go into a temple, and there was a beggar sitting on a wooden box. He was sitting and asking for alms. So sannyasi looked at him and said, you see, I am also supposed to beg, so I have nothing to offer to you. But can I tell you something? You are sitting on that wooden box, why don't you open and see? Then this beggar said, no, sir, I am a 4th generation. My great-grandfather was a beggar sitting on this. My grandfather also sat on it. My father sat. Now I have sitting. My son is already getting ready. So I am a 4th generation. What is there to open and see? So sannyasi looked at him and smiled at him and said that whether you sit on the box for 1 hour or 1 million hours, unless you open what it is, you may not know what it is. Then he went into the temple. So this last sentence was creating a little bit of a problem for this beggar. After 3-4 days, this thought, what this sannyasi said makes a lot of sense. So there was a lock, he couldn't even open it. He took a huge stone and then broke that lock. He opened it. To his surprise, he found he was sitting on a wooden box which had gold and diamond and everything inside. He was sitting on it and begging. So this is the concluding message I want to leave it. That's why I call it as a treasure in the wooden box. Thank you for this opportunity.